Welcome to VO Life, presented by Gravy for the Brain Oceania with me, Toby Ricketts. This is the voiceover interview where I interview people about all things voiceover, and we have a good old chinwag about lots of voiceover stuff. So if you're a total voice nerd, like we are, then strap in because it's going to be a great chat. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Juliet Jordan, who has 35 years experience in the Australian market, has been a voice with RMK for many, many years, now heads up the voicebusiness.com.au and voiceover.com.au as well. So we're going to ask her about that coming on. But welcome to the show, Juliet.
Well, thanks very much, Tony. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool, fantastic. Now, it's a belated Happy Women's Day because it was it's still Women's Day in America. And I wanted to, obviously wish everyone a Happy Women's Day, but start off with a question of how in Australia has being a female voice artist changed over the years? And has it changed?
Well, actually, it has, because advertising seems to be using a lot more female voices than they did when I first started. I was in the business 35 years ago when we were slicing and dicing things. And it's fantastic because obviously women are being encouraged to show up everywhere. And I have to say, though, I've got one proviso. The thing of having one day to celebrate women doesn't quite cut it. I think we need to do better than that.
Fair enough, exactly. Every
yes,
day. Every day.
Women in voiceovers, women are very much seen as the voiceover of trust. Particularly, it's interesting to see what's happened to voiceovers and the types of quality of sound that are used for women and ads after the pandemic or during the pandemic. A lot of more mature, calm, sensible sort of woman sounds have been utilized extensively in advertising recently.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I've definitely noticed, and there's been lots of sort of comment over the last sort of 5, probably to 10 years, that there has been much more of a trend towards using female voiceovers, even for things in a very traditionally male domain like cars, for example. It's a great example where now they've realized that. Luxury cars, exactly. Like it's all about the sort of smooth female voice as opposed to the sort of ballsy,
not only that, but have you
voice.
noticed that in a lot of the ads they actually have females driving the cars, and there's all these poor guys sitting there with these female drivers, and they're all sort of looking like they're enjoying themselves, but from my experience, that isn't quite the case.
Fair enough. There's actually a great film. I don't know if you've ever seen it, called Inner World. Have you ever watched that film?
No, I haven't seen that one.
You have to look that up because that's all about like a woman trying to make it in voiceover in LA. And basically, it's about movie trailers. But I'd seriously suggest you look it up because there's so much like voiceover humor in it, and you'd absolutely love it if you're
Great,
in a
I'll
place
put
where
it
you
down.
are. So let's go right back to the beginning and talk about how you got into voiceover, because I always like hearing about people's stories about how they got in. And obviously, I mean, we're both voice trainers and we both deal with sort of newbie voices all the time. One of the big questions is, how do I get into voiceover? It's not the same as it used to be. Like, there's many more people and the industry has changed a lot. There's more work as well. But like, how did you first come across this thing called voiceover and realize that you had a passion for it and had a talent for it?
Well, I think I have to go way, way, way back until when I was a little kid. My parents were really good at reading to me, and they used to read and put all the little voices into the characters in the books, and I would copy them. And I would also have loads of little toys lined up. For a kid, I was bunged into this huge double bed. I had this double bed all to myself, and I got scared at night. So I had all of these little toys next to me, and I gave them all voices. And so I started to do a lot of character voices and all those crazy things so that they would comfort me at night. So voice and voiceover, well, how did I move into actually professionally doing it? Well, I trained in London at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art as an actress. I also went to university in the United States and trained as a director and a psychologist. And all of those things sort of merged quite nicely with also speaking. It's very hard to sort of shut me up, basically. It's my dear late husband used to say. And so I sort of put them all together to form a training organization. But actually, I'm digressing. I should go back to the voiceover. I got into voiceover when I moved to Australia. After I finished drama school, I was destitute and derelict and ran out of money and everything like that. And my parents had moved to Australia. So I decided I would throw myself on their mercy and come over for a holiday. And that Dad said, yeah, no problem, come on over. So I came on over, and instead of sort of mooching about the house, Dad said, well, look, you've done all this training and everything. Are you going to try to make some money out of it? And I said, sure, but I don't sort of really want to stay in Australia, because it did seem like the boondocks at that time. And so he said, look, I'll shout you that's an Australian saying, shout, which means I'll treat you to, right? I'll shout you a trip to go up to Sydney, because I was living in Melbourne at that time, to go and see people, tread the board, show your wares. What are you made of, girl? Do something. So I went. And fortunately, that was a very useful little weekend trip, because I managed to score the lead role in the biggest miniseries that had ever been in Australia.
Wow, that's a pretty big moment.
That was pretty damn good, wasn't it? And that required me, fortunately, to actually sound quite English. So I, having just come from England and trained in Lambda, that worked out quite well, and that was a wonderful experience, because the miniseries was all about the history of Australia and this poor woman that had been a convict, unjustly sent to Australia, and she ended up by becoming the most successful businesswoman in Sydney. So I thought, I'm going to follow this. Sounds good.
Yeah, that's somewhat.
So I went and did that, and then after that, I got into psychology and doing millions of personal growth courses. And this was a very good move as a voice trainer, because people kept saying to me, I like your voice. Can you teach me how to sound like that? And I said, sure. and from that, I started to devise courses and training and whatever. And a parallel thing, I thought, well, how am I going to keep making a buck while I'm devising all these courses and stuff? So I knew about voiceover. So I went and I applied to various voice agencies, of which really RMK was the only one at the time, run by the original owner of it, Ron Scott, and was sharply rejected by the agent. And so I thought, oh, well, that's not so good. But anyway, I decided I would keep on going, as one does. You have to be enterprising. And I made a very good demo and put it all around the place. And then I ended up by turning up to different studios and getting hired as a freelance. And fortunately, from one of those meetings, one of the people who I did a corporate narration with was best buddies with the owner of RMK. And he went back and said, I think you better get this girl. She's really doing well. And so they actually called me up, which I liked. That was great for the ego. And from then on in, I stayed there for 35 years, loving every minute of it. They were a great agency. And then, of course, I really spent most of my time after that with my own business.
And which we'll get onto in a second.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really interesting to see how like the voice training and the psychology and the voiceover, like you've kind of ridden the waves of that, as if you like. I'm always like going back to the voice training thing and people wanting to have a voice that sounds nice. It's my experience because we both run in-person voice courses. I run the New Zealand Voice Academy, which actually sort of trains people.
Which is incredibly famous.
Exactly. A small plug for myself. Yeah. Like one of the biggest things that always comes out of it is just the fact that almost no one in society, like it'd be less than sort of 2% of people, even consider listening to their voice and how they sound to other people. Yet it's like the primary thing that we use to communicate with everyone else in our lives. We send emails and stuff, but mostly the relationships that matter, it's all done with your voice. And just the value that you can get from learning how to use that voice better is phenomenal. And do you find the same in your courses, that when people actually sit down and think about it, they're kind of like, this is so important?
Absolutely. You've got me convinced. Yes, indeed. And of course, people do have that initial response to their voice because they hear it differently, as you're probably well aware. Absolutely. When they speak, they hear it echoing through their bones of their body and also coming back to their ears in stereo. And of course, when they hear it just coming back, they go from stereo to mono. So it's a diminished experience and it does not compute, does not sound to them like them. So anything that doesn't sort of compute with us, we tend to press the reject button like that and get rid of it. as far as the value of the voice, I entirely agree and have made a big business out of it for the past 35 years or whatever, because people don't think about their voice. Well, they are now a lot more, interestingly, because the word, we see a lot of people saying so-and-so has a voice or get a voice for this or whatever. So there are different sort of things that we're talking about with voice too. We're talking about, do you have a voice at the table? Is there something that you need to say? Do you have an opinion about something? And then, of course, we got the physical. Well, how do I actually say it in such a way that I don't sound like an idiot or whatever, right? So we've got it. So we've got to learn how to optimize the body. And a lot of people don't realize that how important the body is. Many people, I know I'm talking to the converted here because you know all about this, but for the listeners here, is that most people talk about your voice as an instrument. Nah, your voice is the music. The body is the instrument. Because if you get the body going, then the music comes out right. And so we work with that. And then once you've got the how to, the why, and then you've got to have the where. Where are you going to go and actually make your voice heard? And that's what we're going to talk about a little later about AI voices too, which is a whole new ball game, which we've got our finger on the pulse here in Australia on that.
Yeah, I'm very keen to hear about that a bit later. Absolutely. Yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah, like when I've heard sort of radio interviews with, say, a CEO who's maybe new in the job or something, there can sometimes be just something in their voice that belies the fact that they're nervous about the interview, which can then like translate into the fact that they're not sure about what they're saying, which can translate into like a drop in share price. Like it's amazing how nuanced the voice is and how much we can read. Like I always give the example to students of the fact that, if the phone rings and you pick it up and you talk to someone, you can tell whether it's male or female, happy or sad, old or young, sick or well. Like there's all these things you can intuit from someone before they've even said what they're going to say. And it's all riding on the back of their voice. And so if you can grab hold of that and actually, kind of like come up with the subtext you want people to receive, it can be a lot more powerful as an instrument. But again, we're preaching to the choir, aren't we?
Yeah, no, well, that's great that everyone hears that, because that's indeed absolutely true. It's a dead giveaway. It's quite interesting now that we're moving much more into video, however, because obviously a lot of work was done on the phone, lots of customer service and stuff. And now it's video or AI. And so the voice is taking on a slightly different appeal, I think. But at all times, it's good to optimize what you have. I mean, it's good to get your body working. It's good to get your voice working and take things out of the zone of, I don't know how it works, right? Into doing something about it. And it's not as hard as you think, is it? We've developed this structure of 4-session courses, basically, that take you through step by step how your voice works and how to develop different aspects of it. So by the end, you put it all together and you know how to control your own voice, no matter what happens. Because, of course, you will have threats coming in from left, right, and center. Particularly, it's interesting, the people we teach, we have a range of people. We teach people who are high-level executives. Most of the big movers and shakers in town have come. We've got international film stars. We've got people who have to learn accents. We've got, the local counselor who needs to sound good at a council place. We've got, obviously, voiceover students. We've got people in the media, the news readers and things like that. And it's fascinating working with each one of them because every single person has a specific need. There are generalizations, as you know, but it's the one thing I always find that's useful, that I've studied psychology, is that I really like the psychology of it. I like to know how to really help that person. I see it actually as personal growth through sound. Yeah. So it's about improving the person's feeling about themselves and their confidence. And confidence, I think, is knowing that you know. So you've got to have something to know and then practice it and get good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk in the courses a lot about how, confidence is key. People want to hear a confident voice, unless you're playing a character that's meant to be not confident or something. Like generally, even to get the gigs of voiceover, you need to kind of portray that confidence. You have to, either have to fake it till you make it, or literally be as confident, as you are. And so, but the thing that scuppers that is usually adrenaline. When people are nervous, that usually kills confidence, and it also makes your throat tighten up and you sound terrible. What are some of the tools you give people to sort of of unpick that adrenaline surge when they get in front of microphones. Because even, I mean, it's amazing how afraid people are of microphones. And when they're just devices that record sound, and you think, like, why does this make people so nervous? It's
Exactly. Well, why it makes people so nervous is that it's just out of their comfort zone. They're not used to it. I mean, obviously, voiceover artists in front of a microphone actually love it. Give me more. However, what we work on primarily is the control of the body, which is first and foremost the breathing. And we work really with martial arts principles. We work with very much breathing into the center of the guts of you. And that is an area of your body that really doesn't tense up. If you go into your 2 finger widths below your belly button, you'll find that that's a pretty damn good stabilizing place. And you might think, yeah, but I'm too nervous to breathe. But we have people also think in different ways and concentrate. There's one thing that when I did psychology at university, I did my honors degree in psychology, and I ran a sort of wild experiment. I'm tending to do things like that. I love finding out about people and what they like to do.
You weren't the person that locked them in the basements and made one.
No, I didn't. But I wouldn't put it past me, to tell you the truth. But no, I used to run these various experiments, one of which I put a whole heap of cookies on the road on a plate to see what people would do. And I wanted to know how they would react if they were by themselves or with another person. And I had a few hypotheses about that, but that's not the interesting one. The one that I really did was when I had people have an experience of judging themselves and judging other people's faces and things. And about the whole underlying thing was about self-consciousness. You know, I was always fascinated. Why do people say, oh God, I hate that picture of myself. Oh, it's awful. Of course, people do the same thing with their voice. Oh, I hate my voice. It's awful. Right. And so one of the things that I discovered was people who have high self-esteem, which we measured, you know, with the measurement and everything, tended to feel happy when they saw pictures and heard voices of themselves sounding good. Yeah. Which makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But people with low self-esteem, as done by the measurements, actually felt happier when they saw pictures and heard voices of themselves sounding bad. So one of the things that was fascinating is that people tend to want to match up what they think about themselves with how they sound or how they look. And one of the things is if we can change the way that they're thinking about themselves, they can also optimize the possibility of increasing their ability in speaking. So that's why when someone comes in and says, oh, Jesus, I hate the sound of my voice. I'm just hopeless. I'm never going to make it, you know, whatever. We don't say, oh, no, you're going to be fine. We actually go in and say, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. How'd you get that way? And what's all that about? And then work from where they're at to build them up by giving them experiences and feedback, continuous feedback, which they can't deny, because if they record and they hear their own voice back, they start to convince themselves that they're better. So one of the things that's really important, I think, and particularly in the recording area here in our training, is for people to get feedback so that they teach themselves more than anything and convince themselves.
That's very interesting. I'm fascinated by I've delved into a little bit, but the psychology behind voiceover, because I feel like it is such a deeply ingrained thing. You know, how our society has developed, and how, I don't know, chimpanzees use their voices at others, and how language has evolved, and then how we take that language and we are able to talk like we're doing now about very advanced and often abstract concepts, and all of that has this kind of emotional subtext, and that's what I think. When voiceovers, either consciously or unconsciously, can tap into that subtext that they're generating, when that aligns with the script, that's when you get the most powerful voiceovers. When the words you're saying and the tone that you're talking about is also reflected in this kind of ethereal subtext that's being generated by the way it's being voiced, you know?
Well, very, very much so. Of course, when I went to Lambda, I trained in acting, and there's millions of angles that we go into to make sure that we can get engaged with a character. And that is absolutely relevant to voiceover. It's about total engagement. It's an acting job,
Mm,
basically,
mm.
right?
Even
And
straight voiceover, isn't it? Like, even doing
yeah,
a
that's right.
voiceover.
Everything one. So we always have, even if we're doing a corporate narration, we're always somebody talking to somebody
Mm,
about something, and we're
mm,
somewhere,
mm,
right? And one of the things we have this little formula that we give our voiceover trainees about the questions they need to ask just to get in
mm,
to the character, and everything is a character, basically.
mm, mm,
So you're never just sort of, hi, I'm the presenter from News 65 talking to so and so. You're always engaging and stuff.
mm,
And there's ways of doing that. And of course, some people find that very difficult. They have this sort of bland thing.
mm.
And it's quite interesting because some people over engage too. You've probably noticed that, particularly we find people who have had maybe acting training, they come in and they overdo it. So
Totally.
it's how to act more like a screen actor, actually, and to be much more subtle.
Do less.
Very much in touch with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting when we get new people in the studio, and often it's a case of giving them the tools to, like, and I talk about them overcoming themselves, giving themselves permission to let go. And I feel like people are often afraid to stick their heads up and be different and be noticed. But that's kind of the one thing that we're asked to do as voiceover artists, especially in auditioning, is to, like, be different. And, like, seem to be some people who are better than others at being able to tap into that, though. You get some people who, they do a reading and you say, well, that was good, but, like, can you try doing this? And they do it again exactly the same as if they haven't heard the direction. And it's like, some people are able to change their voice massively, and others are not as able to do it. And I still kind of maintain that, with enough training, anyone can become a voice artist, but it's going to take some people a lot longer than others. Would you subscribe to that, or do you think there are people that are...
Yes, I would definitely subscribe to that. I mean, some people have a greater connection with their inner emotional life than others because they've had different life experiences that have got them to the point that they're at. And some people may have, unbeknownst to us, had, been attacked by a pedophile or something, and completely closed off an aspect of themselves that they don't realize. And then that gets activated and then they close off again. So one of the things that we do is try to find out a little bit more about the person who we're teaching, and how best to help them navigate themselves, their own psyche, so that they can get into that space of engagement. But yes, you're always going to find some people who are much better at it than others. And there's some that are amazing, aren't there? I mean, they just jump in and you think, my God,
totally.
That's great. And that's excellent. The one thing that I think you've probably found, like we have too, is that there's part of us that feel a little bit difficult about training people in voiceover because there's an overabundance of voiceover artists. And this might move us into that conversation about what's happening in Australia too, right? There's everybody and their brother and sister want to be a voice artist because they think they can make a quick buck, as I'm sure I'm talking to the converted of everyone listening here. But we all know that it's an art form, just like anything else. And it does require a skill and training and persistence and business acumen, all of that sort of stuff, which is quite good because some people will drop out because it's too hard basket. When we're training people who want to do voiceover, we can sort of find out who really is going to be capable of doing it, and other people who aren't necessarily so capable. However, what they will be gaining are skills in how to use their voice, which will be useful to them in any profession that they're in. But I'm very upfront with people to say, look, this isn't as easy as you think, and we really need to get real here.
Absolutely, I think people do. Have heard stories, or they've heard about how much sort of certain voiceover artists make. It's like, I did an hour session and I got $3,000 or something. And people think, oh, well, they just went in for an hour and they got $3,000 when there's been like 40 hours of work to get to that point, to just that job. And that's let alone all the training and stuff you have to do. I compare it often to, like, if someone deciding that they're going to, like, be a concert pianist, and they're like, I really like the piano. I'm going to become a concert pianist. Listen to this, and just going and like bashing away on a grand piano. It's like, well, people, that is making noise on a piano, but people aren't going to pay to hear that. Like there's a big difference between being able to make music from your instrument, as you say, you need to put the hours in order to actually move people with your voice. It's just a lot more convenient to have a voice to carry around to practice on than it is to lug a grand piano around. So
it's much more portable.
yeah, exactly. But I feel like it is changing a little bit. Lots of people want to have a go at voiceover. But yeah, I'm not sure whether we're doing a good enough message of actually telling like how difficult it is. Or I mean, it's difficult because so many people who have made it as voiceover artists have always been passionate about it. And I found with my training that that's the thing that really separates people who go on to do great things and become full-time voiceover artists, and the ones that do sort of flounder around for a little bit and then sort of eventually give it up, is the passion that they have for it. If you've got this really deep passion for it to start with, then any practice you do is really fun and it doesn't feel like work. It's like a hobby, that may eventually lead to you getting paid. So do you offer any advice for people who are starting out, like the best ways to get success as a voiceover artist?
Yes, I would say definitely engage with that passion and find it in yourself. And then get technique, and then know where to go, what to do, and what you need to put together. And at the same time, don't give up your day job a lot of the time, right? So that they're not suddenly put under enormous stress, thinking everything, putting all my eggs in one basket. Realizing
Absolutely.
that there's a progression. And you can hit the jackpot. I mean, for instance, I'm actually a walking case of that. I mean, a lot of the things I've done, I've just walked into and just got the big thing without hardly anything. But if you're right, though, to get to that point, I actually had a whole life of training and stuff beforehand, but I didn't think of that at the time.
Exactly.
But it's just like anything. Whereas there's a TED talk and whatever about having that 10,000 hours of doing something over and over again to actually then have it really embraced in your being. To become masterful at it. And a lot of people who are passionate and having fun doing voiceover are actually already masters at it, because they've all through their life, they've built into their psyche the skill set that's good.
Totally.
I think a lot of people's passion is being sorely tested at the moment, though, because there is a lot of risk and threats coming into the voiceover industry.
So let's talk about the voiceover industry in Australia, because it's something that I have been a bit unfamiliar with. I've talked with Luke Downs from RMK about the sort of industry over there. That was a year or so ago. The thing I still am sort of interested to see what happens is, there's been a very stable state of voiceover where you've had the big agencies running the show, and you've got, voiceover artists with beepers who are just, jump in a taxi as soon as they get the beep sort of thing, like Batman. And that's been the sort of professional realm. There's been sort of dabblers, probably freelancers and stuff around the edges. But I mean, like happened in the US, 5 to 10 years ago, there was a tidal wave of home studio people and then work to satisfy the demand for voiceover there as well, being people like independent directors who are just shooting stuff on DSLRs and making small films, and they don't have the budget, and it's not really a big production, so it's like they don't want to pay the full agency rate for a TV commercial because it's just going to be something that they show maybe a couple of hundred people. So it's like shattered into a million pieces, the voiceover market, and there's all these different types of voice jobs around. And Australia is probably on the verge of responding to that. And, with people doing training like yourself and Gravy for the Brain, I feel like there's going to be more people setting up to service that market. Would that be an accurate description of how it's evolving? What are your predictions for how that's going to work?
Well, it's quite interesting. You probably know that we have it's almost like in the sort of 1980s or something, I guess. Yes, indeed. The setup here is that people have voice agents, and there are about 3.5 agents in Sydney. They're a major because we're 25 million people in this giant land or so, and all of our work is set in the major cities around. Of course, the major place is Sydney. Secondary market would be Melbourne. And then we have Brisbane, then we have Perth, then we have Adelaide, and then we have maybe Hobart and Tasmania. Something happens in Canberra from time to time, but mostly everything's there, right? And that's how it was in the beginning and how it sort of still is now, even though the internet is around. And we tend to go to studios, or we have up until the pandemic, excuse my pronunciation, gone into studios. And that's half the fun, really. So we're called in like, okay, get to the studio, such and such, whatever. And so we'll race to the studio. Your agent tells you, you get there, you get the job gig, you do the job, walk out after an hour, and away you go. And then the agent sends the bill. And then you're floundering around waiting for the next gig. Yeah. So most
you can't
everything
really hold down another full-time job doing that, because you couldn't just
that's one of the things that was caused me a bit of difficulty, because I was running this big organization at the same time, and often there would be a call out for a gig and I couldn't go because I was running a workshop or something. And what I used to do is I would put myself out. And of course, that's very difficult for an agency to deal with, because they want someone who's there all the time. Well, it worked for years and years and years, but in the end, I think it just became a bit difficult for all of us because, it just is. So you have to be on tap, on call, ready to go, like a Uber driver. Yeah. And so that's the way it was. That's the way it sort of still is. But things have changed since the pandemic because, of course, people couldn't go into studios. And so the people who really felt the brunt of the studios, by the way. Yeah. So they're sort of collapsing left, right, and center. Eventually, we were allowed into studios, but we had to take our own headphones. Interesting. Don't know why if they wiped the mic or anything, but so we would go in and do things there, and of course we began to start to do things remotely, and that has caught on. And there are a few very good voice artists who actually are in Australia, but they originally came from England. Myself being one of them, but there's some other good ones, and they already had a lot of experience actually with the international market. So they had home studios and they just, killed it. Fantastic.
Yeah, totally. Smashed it out.
But a lot of people still haven't even done that.
Yeah, well,
so we're not quite there.
It's a very technical part of the whole game. Like I say, to be an independent voiceover artist now, you need the craft of voiceover, how to actually be a voiceover, the business skills to get the work and to market yourself and to do all the billing and tax and everything. And then the tech side now is huge in terms of you have to run your own recording studio and deal with other recording studios, because they're the ones that are expecting flawless audio. So you need to know what their perception of flawless audio is, and then meet that with your technical requirements and build the right studio. And I feel like standards have slipped a little bit in terms of broadcast audio. Like you can get away with more than you used to be able to get away with probably, but it's still a very big hill to climb for a lot of people is recording and editing your voice to a broadcast
Toby,
standard.
Is why we tune into your wonderful seminars on how to do audio, because you're an audio whiz. This is where we recommend Gravy for the Brain to our clients too.
That's fantastic.
Because it's a wonderful resource for all sorts of things, but particularly for the technical side. And so you're a bit of a star over here.
Great. Oh, well, that's good. I should do more technical, because I feel like people get bored of my technical stuff, but clearly not. I always find it very easy to talk about because I love technology and I love sharing it. So
fantastic. And there was also one that I saw the other day, which was very well presented by the gentleman from Canada, who's
Graham Spicer.
That's right. And he made it so dirt simple, but not patronizing, but it was really good. And so we've had some good comments from some of our clients saying that was a really good, simple way of doing things. It was very good.
Oh, fantastic.
That was I congratulate him.
I'll let him know. Absolutely. That's fantastic. What trends do you see in the Australian market? We talked about the trend towards female voiceovers, but is there anything, has there been this, ubiquitous trend towards the casual, just say it like you're telling a friend read?
That's been here for a while now. There's been a trend definitely for the compassionate, and the sort of compassionate female sort of rakes it in at the moment. The males, though, they're still a bit blokey and let's have a bit of fun. And I think as everything winds down, it's really interesting, actually, because, we were all locked up for 2 years and we've just thrown open the borders. Well, everyone's thrown off their mask as well. It's like nothing has ever happened. People are wandering around. We used to all be, okay, keep away, keep away. And now it's just like, oh, hi, how are you? Breathe, breathe, breathe all over you,
wow.
which is interesting.
Yeah. We're not yet there in New Zealand. We're going through the wave at the moment, but I think we'll come out the other side and hopefully be like that.
Well, we still have it. We still have just actually as much, but it's suddenly, instead of being the front page news, it's sort of down on page 5. What we've got at the moment is we've got of course, the terrible situation going down in Ukraine and the situation here in the floods. So that's what's going down here.
Pretty horrific, isn't it? So I'm just conscious of time, and I do want to give us a big long chat about AI and TTS, because that's kind of your specialty in Australia. Like, you have led the charge in kind of heading up. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, do you want to just define the terms AI voice, TTS? Like, what does it all mean? Just boil it down for us.
All right. Well, AI voice, or AI, is artificial intelligence. So it's usually a digital compilation of something. Yeah. And when we talk about AI voice, it's basically taking all of the sounds of your voice and digitizing them, which is quite easy, actually, if you think about it, because even as linguists, we can break down sounds into phonemes, etc. And we do that, when we teach various articulation exercises and stuff. So all this is a digital rendition of how we speak, which is not really rocket science, quite easy to do.
Just gluing together different sounds that we can make, effectively.
Sorry, what?
It's just gluing together the different sounds that we're capable of making, isn't it?
Exactly. So it's just a compilation of all of the sounds. You just digitize them and put them together. Now, where artificial intelligence fell flat to start with is everybody sounded like a robot. Right. And of course, no one wants to, in advertising, buy from a robot unless they're buying robot wear or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or unless you're Stephen Hawking and that's what you sound like.
So the thing that's threatening now to us in artificial intelligence is the clever tweaking. Just like if you're in a recording studio, how you can tweak the voice and equalize and compress and all of that stuff. Well, of course, that's all being done with people's voices to try to tweak for emotions, etc. Now, you might think, emotions? My God, that must be, how do you do that? Well, there was a study a long time ago by a bloke called Manfred Klein, I think it was, and he made a study called Sentics. And that is a study of how emotions actually have a wavelength. And when you go and you hear certain things in this wavelength, it can be either an audio wavelength or it could be a visual wavelength of color, because everything has a wavelength. It's all vibration. We are vibrations, right? We are affected by that. And in fact, it's very interesting. If you watch the news, for instance, and you hear somebody recounting something that's really moved them, you will pick that up as well. And you don't know why you're picking up that vibe, but essentially their auditory wavelength is signaling it. And their facial expression is going into certain things. So these wavelengths we are picking up all the time. And so one of the things is that people in artificial intelligence development are beginning to study how to do that. Because again, you can break it down into how to do it. It's, again, not rocket science. So the difficulty for voice artists in artificial intelligence, well, there are many of them. But one is that it's getting better. The scientists are getting better and better and better at reproducing sound to such an effect that there are some where you can't really tell the difference between your voice and an artificial or synthetic voice of you. Of which I've had mine made, and I can. It's very interesting. It's very convincing.
It's interesting. Like the thing that I still find is, because they have gotten better and better and better, these artificial voices, but they still aren't able to pull context from a sentence, a complex context, and then end the sentence in the right way. Or like there's at the moment there's nothing other than vanilla. Like there's just telling it like it is. They haven't mastered emotion as far as I'm aware, apart from like video game emotion, which is very big and very it's very like crazy. Well, but soft emotion, like you're talking about, the trend towards like a sympathetic read or a something warm and comforting, like it's definitely not that nuanced yet. Like they haven't gotten into that.
I hear what you say, but there will be. There will
Well,
be.
yes, things get
It'll
better,
be
don't
just
they?
studied, and they'll be able to do it. I tell you what,
Hmm.
everything's getting faster. We're talking about what's that computer that can beat the chess masters and stuff because it computes so fast.
Right.
Well, people are feeding in data all
Hmm.
about all of this voices and stuff, and the computers with that sort of brain power are coming up with solutions pretty fast.
Hmm.
So don't think it's not going to happen, because it will.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that we have to do now to protect the voice artists' rights. And that's might lead me into saying some other stuff in a minute.
Right. Okay. Cool. Like, there are a few Australian companies doing this, aren't there? I'm trying to find my. I had notes on a few of them, but I think I threw them out. There's one company in Brisbane.
Or Replica.
Replica. That's right. And they
Great
were.
name. Great name.
Yeah, exactly. And they it seems to be that the one of the leading reasons, like there seems to be two use cases that are actually kind of winning at the moment, and I feel like a lot of work will go their way. One is in the area of explainer videos, where it's basically a cost thing. If you can get the cost of voiceover right down, and the quality doesn't matter that much. Like if you go to a business that has a few customers and they've got a video that says what they do, if the voice sounds a bit synthetic, it still kind of does its job. Like you think, oh, that's a fake voice. Maybe people don't realize. I don't know, but like it feels all a bit sort of plastic. But that's kind of fine. Like that's I feel like that's going to take the entry level people into the voice industry, which is a bit of a shame. Like that would be your first kind of voiceover gigs, is those easy e-learning explainer video scripts where you don't really need much acting. And the other use case seems to be around computer games, and the fact that they're introducing what's called dynamic content into video games, where there's no script effectively. We've all known about chatbots for a long time, which can have a conversation with you, and it'll sound like it'll feel like you're chatting to a real person. And they're starting to integrate this into video games with a character that comes up to you and starts talking to you, and they're not actually on any kind of script. They're making it up as they go along. But of course, all the lines in video games are usually voiced, well before the video game's released. There's a whole massive stack of them that the voices have to read, and they're all just fed into the game at the right times. With dynamic TTS, the lines will be fed in and generated on the fly along with the text. So it is literally like meeting, new characters in every voice game. So that, for me, that's like, well, absolutely. There's actually no way to solve that with voice artists at the moment. Like if you want dynamic content, you can't have someone in a booth reading real time all these stuff that the AI generates. So that is a really interesting area for me. And also, like talking about digital first voices, where they actually haven't sampled anyone. They're actually starting to see how speech is made, and then come up with a new voice, which is not anyone's voice. It's kind of an interesting area.
Well, not only that, but they're also combining people's voices,
right,
to create a new voice as well. The other area too is customer service too, where there are customer service people talking back to you who aren't there. But yes, this the intelligence behind everything is jumping about by leaps and bounds. Absolutely. And the other area too would be IVR and all of that too.
That's true. Yeah, IVR
would be an easy picking. The one thing to think about is that at this point in time, one, it's more fun working with a voice artist. Two, they're not as expensive as everyone tries to write on their blurb. And three, they're actually faster too, usually, because rather than twiddling knobs to try to change the voice quality, you can just tell somebody.
Totally. Yeah.
And they'll do it as quick as anything like that. So I think that the more that we go into automation, the more also we're going to want to have human connection too. So that's one of the saving graces for this. But just like beta, VCR, the video stores, the record players and stuff, everything goes through this phase of fading out. But of course, records are coming back. So it could be that it'll pick out the people who are really good and sort of get rid of the people who possibly should be maybe looking elsewhere to do something.
And is there any way, I mean, you've been an advocate for voiceovers rights through this with OVON, the Open Voiceover Network, correct?
Yes.
And how can you defend against a technology that will effectively just undermine it, will make, intermediate voiceovers irrelevant?
Well, that's what we're doing. At the crack of dawn or the middle of the night, because I'm in Australia and everybody else is in the States or Europe or whatever, we have been meeting for over the past year or so to figure out how are we going to save the day, right? For what are the harms and the uses and everything of synthetic voice, which is what we're talking about here with voiceover. How can we somehow or other set some guidelines before it becomes a complete shootout? Yeah. Because it's a case of if we can jump in fairly soon with something, particularly of trying to appeal to people's ethics, right? You'll see a lot of these companies, the synthetic voice production companies, which, by the way, many of them started with open source software that they've just gone and then
totally Google's Togotron too. Yeah,
Yeah.
Google's Togotron 2 is most of those voice platforms, the speech hellos,
Exactly.
and just have literally just copied Google's model, made their own models, and just put a platform around it and are selling
That's
voice
it.
service.
And
no one really realizes.
Whoa.
Like I thought when I still got into it, I was like, wow, all these places are developing independently their own voice synthesis things, and they're not. They've just literally taken all Google's research, downloaded it into their own website, and are selling it off. But
Exactly. Well,
but that's had the massive downside of being. It only comes out at about, I think it's 22050 kilohertz, or it's 22 kilohertz or 32 kilohertz. It's not actually broadcast quality, and you can hear it when you use one of those platforms.
Good techno ear at work.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Like, I can hear that instantly because it's missing all the top end that you usually record in your S's and stuff. And it's not because as soon as you double the frequency, you're at least cubing the amount of processing that it takes to do that sort of work. And no one's willing to sort of go that far. So that's a really interesting hurdle or a line that no one's really crossed yet.
Well, there are a few people actually, and there's a bloke who wrote his master's degree and developed this thing called Lyrebird, right, which is at the basis of a very good software called Descript, which is the one that I've had my synthetic voice made with, and it's incredibly handy in a way for a producer and also for a voice artist. Interestingly, for instance, if you're given a script, right, everything is written in text. And if you have made a synthetic voice, which requires you to record a certain amount of, not line after line, they actually had you read a whole heap of David Attenborough's latest documentary or something, right? And they need less and less and less now. There used to be lots of lines, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, I did one that was like 10,000, 20,000 words.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
So
you
bad.
read things that you don't make sense or anything. But this one was quite interesting reading. It's like reading a doco. And then what happens is that you type something in, and then, let's say a word has changed. Your client says, look, would you please change client to clients or whatever? So instead of doing a drop in, re-record, blah, 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 you can actually just change the type. You just type the script differently, and your synthetic voice will fill in the bit. And if it's a good synthetic voice, you can't tell the difference. And so it's a very quick edit. So it's there's a lot of people doing their podcasts that way. You can also link it up with visuals and whatnot.
That's right, isn't it? It's like you basically go in and voice something, it converts it into text, and then you can basically edit it afterwards in text,
absolutely.
and it comes out as audio again. It's just phenomenal.
Exactly. You can even edit visuals as well, because it has the capability. And
That's
also, I highly recommend going to their website, because they have some of the cleverest marketing videos I've seen in a long time.
I've seen those.
They're really clever. And did you? I don't know. Because I sent you.
No, I've seen. About 6 months ago, and I thought that is a very compelling marketing video. Like it's
very compelling.
Even for someone like me, it's a bit of a threat to.
But what I wanted to go to and warn voice artists is that a lot of these synthetic voice production companies have terms and conditions, right? And of course, as terms and conditions, we know they go on forever and ever and ever and ever in tiny print, right? And you sort of say, yeah, I agree, without ever having had a look. Well, this is where they catch you out, because they have things about how they're going to use your voice, how they can keep your voice, how they can distort your voice, how they can mix it with somebody else's voice and whatever. And once it's mixed with somebody else's voice, whose voice is it, right? And all of this, and this is the thing that we're doing at the Open Voice Network. We're trying to figure out all the parameters that need to be understood, particularly by production houses, so that they don't go and rip off us voiceovers voiceover artists,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Because I know that you probably know that we're sweet people. We tend to want to just do the best for everybody, and we'll bend over backwards to help, and flexible to the point of contortionism, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is something that we need to put our foot down, just like we have, SAG-AFTRA, and here in Australia we have Media Entertainment Arts Alliance, which you also have in New Zealand too, right? Because we actually share the same thing.
Yeah, it definitely has a presence over here. I'm not sure if it has a formal presence or whether the agents.
Well, you actually do. You
Right.
actually do have somebody who's the chief of New Zealand and everything.
Oh, good. I should meet
Yeah,
them.
yeah. Well, you might have to find out about that.
Yeah, I will.
No, it was a she last time I looked. But we're going in and trying to figure out how to get some sort of rules of the game set up. Right? Because people actually tend to be pretty fair once they know. But the one thing is at the moment in time, everything is stacked in these terms and conditions against the voice artist. So one of the... sorry, go ahead.
One of the arguments will be that there'll always be someone that will allow their voice. If someone puts up a job for $500 on one of the voice platforms and says, here, digitize your voice, we'll pay you $500 and we can use it for anything. There will be someone that goes for that. They might not be that good. And maybe that's the argument against is that, well.
Yeah. There's always going to be that, right? And there's always going to be beyond that, remember? Because this intelligence is being able to recreate voices no matter whether it's a real voice. It's got enough data to get all the real voices in the world. You just analyze all of that stuff and you can make anything. This is like a witch's brew here, right? So we are basically sitting on the potential to be wiped out. Not quite yet, and not totally, right? I know a lot of people saying, oh, don't worry, you're going to still have a lot of work and stuff. But actually, you're not going to have a lot of work in many areas. But if you do want to have some work in that area, then we're going to need to protect ourselves and have some rules of the game. So that's why we're going guns blazing into sorting this out as fast as we can.
So how does that work in terms, practically? Does that happen at a state level, like in terms of countries legislating and having formal legislation that prevents people from, having royalty-free digital voices? How does that actually enact it, and who are you lobbying?
Yeah, well, that's the trick. So one of obviously the bodies that are quite helpful are unions. Yeah, they're the ones that. And particularly, like in Australia, our unions actually set the rate for voiceovers. One of the major differences, which I think makes it quite easy to function in Australia, is that we have pretty much set rates for things. We don't do all this negotiation business.
Yeah, agents definitely have the rate card and they all use it.
Yeah, well, the agents obviously negotiate extra here and there, and particularly for international work. But there's sort of rules of the game in place, and it just makes it flow really easily. People know that they're going to pay this and this for this job and blah, blah, blah. And it makes everything pretty smooth. Difficulty, of course, for Australian voice actors trying to go overseas is that they get absolutely flummoxed by all this negotiation business. They think, oh my God, I don't know what to charge, or do I do a charge for Fiverr, or I don't know what's going on, and they get lost completely.
Totally, yeah. Which is
so that's why we haven't seen quite a lot of voice actors going international.
Right, yeah. I mean, Grave for the Brain obviously has its rates guide, which we've tried to make a central point, which is international, because there's plenty of centralized voice rate cards. Like there's the VOAA rate card, and there's the MEAA rate card, and then there's unions as well, which have their own separate rate card. And Grave for the Brain, anyone can check out at rates.graveforthebrain.com, and you can put in your country and what the production is, and it's got a local person has said what the kind of the rates are, which is I think it's quite helpful. But in terms of going back to the unions setting rates and stuff, the union in the States especially, which is where this will probably be ground zero for in terms of the AI voice stuff. The unions have been losing ground for decades, and in terms of there's been more and more non-union work. There's still some, there's still a good healthy sort of core of union work, but it has been less and less since like the 90s, when they didn't really keep on top of, taming the market and keeping people in line. So I just wonder, like, they'll have to get a lot stronger if they're going to move into this tech space, which they might not understand as well because it's evolving so quickly. And if you have digital first voices where someone just tweaks and tweaks and tweaks until they go, oh, that sounds like a real voice, that doesn't belong to anyone. So is that exempt from these laws?
Yeah, this you're right. It presents a lot of challenges. That's why we also want to educate voice artists. You know that that's the whole point of Gravy for the Brain too, is to educate voice artists about what exists, what's around, what your rights are, to stop sort of the prices going down, and to know and to support each other. So we want to team up here, right? And the one thing that I would like to say to all the Gravy of the Brainers, particularly those overseas, is don't forget Australia. We're a big gig out here. Even though it might seem like we're the back of the boondocks or something, it's interesting. I'm sure many of you have visited Australia, but for those who have not, if you live in Australia, Europe feels like next door, right? Unfortunately, with all this war going on, we're very moved by the whole thing, right? But essentially, from the other way, because I was born in England, lived in England. When I look back to Australia, it wasn't even in my mindset. It's like, Australia, where's that? That's somewhere. And what's it, New Zealand? That's New Zealand lamb. I remember that from the butcher's shop, right? That's about it. But see if you can wrap your mind around including us. We're the Asian Pacific area, and we're huge. We've got Singapore, China, Malaysia, Vietnam, all of this sort of stuff. These are markets that are whopping. There's billions of people here. So don't discount us.
Well, in terms of
that's my rave.
Are you talking about in terms of casting Australians for those roles, or moving creative agencies to Australia?
Interesting you thought. No, putting Australians into the loop in terms of perhaps narrating things. Because one of the things is that companies around this Asian Pacific area, you probably discovered, because you do these multiple accents and stuff, which I do also. The thing is, they want this mid-Atlantic, trans-Pacific type of accent. And Australians, if they're not, Ocker Australians and things like that, you will find they're actually very good sitting in the pocket of this particular area. So lots of markets around this area could be served very well with an Australian or a New Zealand voice that's toned down, right? So we don't want it. We're not talking about Shrimp on the Barbie,
right?
Crocodile Dundee stuff.
Yeah, I wonder if we could come up with a new accent that's like an APAC accent. It's kind of got a bit of Australian, bit of New Zealand, and maybe even a little bit of Asian. And it just feels different from that Northern Hemisphere Mid-Atlantic. It's like the antithesis to the Mid-Atlantic vibe. Because I've done voiceovers like that for Microsoft I did one for, which was like an Asia-Pacific region-wide TVC where they wanted like a little bit of an Asian accent, but a little bit of Kiwi and a tiny bit of those American vowels just to sort of, because quite a lot of the Asian countries have the rhotic R, like in the American accent. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with accent trends and stuff as well.
Well, there we are, Tony.
Toby. Well, exactly. So
we've got a challenge on our hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't we invent a new accent? What the heck?
APAC, the APAC accent. I'm gonna start promoting myself as there we go. Now I do
very
7
good idea.
accents. So let's spend a tiny bit more time on the AI stuff. We've got a little bit more time.
Okay.
Where do you see it going? Because if you can't legislate against it, and technology, because the feedback I've heard from the Voice 123 trial, Voice 123 did a trial where they put AI voices alongside regular voices on their platform, and there's a class of clients who don't care, they just want the voiceover, just whatever costs less, I don't really care, but most of them wanted performance over price.
Yeah,
especially in the kind of the top half of the median in terms of spend. And that bodes quite well for voice artists, I guess, until the technology catches up.
Yes.
What do you see as the future? Because at the moment, hopefully AI peaks too soon. Everyone hears it and goes, that's rubbish. And then they don't select it when it gets better in the future because they just think that's rubbish.
That's interesting. Yes, I think for some people that would be true. I think it's a case of like anything. When anything new comes in, people sort of find it fascinating and they try to twiddle the knobs and use it and stuff. Then they find it's too hard or it's not really as good as you think. And then they either drop off of it and they're burnt, basically, don't want to use it again, like some of the people you're talking about. Other people will sort of come as later It's just that, different types of people who buy things at different stages.
Mm.
And so, and people come in later when it's more developed and they'll say, oh, this is easy. Why didn't I do this before? This is fantastic. This has saved me a whole heap of money and whatnot. And then, of course, there are the people like the luxury buyers, like you said, the people at the top end of the market with the money. Why waste your money on artificial when you get real, for heaven's sakes? Yeah. So essentially, they are buying like prestige buyers. They'll buy the Bentley, for heaven's sakes.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? I wonder if there's a strategy to kind of try and get rid of AI before it even starts is what is allegedly happened.
Allegedly you're trying to get rid of AI?
Well, in terms of making it less successful, would be like what the meat industry did when vegan products started getting onto the market. Was they started their own vegan meat companies and made it awful, and flooded the market with terrible vegan products.
Oh, really?
So that people tried them, hated them, and then went back to eating meat. Allegedly. I don't know if that's true, but it's a great strategy, potentially. So, like, maybe, Ovon could actually develop its own terrible voiceover product.
Okay, I like that. Voiceover terrorists, exactly. Right?
Yeah,
AI team going in to destroy the AI world. Yeah, I'll put that to the meeting. We're having a meeting next week.
Oh,
I think they'll find that utterly fascinating.
Amusing, if nothing else. You would have heard of the Bev Standing story and TikTok.
Yeah.
She's a great for the brainer, of course, one of my fellow territory controllers. That set a precedent in a way that people couldn't just reuse software involving someone's voice on another platform. What was Ovon's kind of response to the Bev Standing case?
They thought it was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And she's part of our group now. I think she's checked up for a couple of meetings.
Right.
And another person, too, who's done an enormous amount, I think, for AI and for educating voice artists is Anne Ganguza with her wonderful series, her podcast series on voice and AI, which I highly recommend people see. She's her husband also works in AI, too, but she's doing a very good job interviewing some really interesting people in the production end of AI and finding out what their thinking is. So definitely tune into her podcast on VO Boss. So that's good. Don't know if I'm allowed to mention that, but I think Anne probably, she's an affiliate. Right?
Yeah, totally. Actually, I listened to her episode I was doing some research on an outfit called Scribe Audio. I don't know if you heard of Scribe Audio. But they're an AI voice company which has come up with this concept of digitizing the back catalogue of publishers with AI voices.
Yes.
So instead of their big titles, which they get voiced by audiobook narrators, there's all these books where they only sell 100 copies a year, but the AI is voicing them. And they approached me to be one of the narrators that did this thing. And so I wanted to know more about the company, and they seemed really good and legit. And then they sent through the final contract, and I hate contracts, and I never read them, but I thought, you should read this one. You should absolutely read it. And I did, and I found two clauses which gave me quite a lot of concern. And they were along the lines of, we can use it for anything we want. It's an infinite time period sort of thing. And I was like, I want to ring fence some of this. Like, I'm not okay with this. And I never heard back from them again. So I don't know whether it's just because they forgot about me or whether because
no, you would have been causing too much trouble.
Possibly.
Yes, yeah. I know. We know about that, and that's a lot to do with. That is a definite market. There are loads and loads of books that are, as you said, not many. Just like 100 copies or whatever that they want to be turned into audiobooks, and AI works really well for that. So they wanted you obviously as a voice that they could distort to use for loads and loads of these books. Now, if you had agreed
for, I think you got paid per book or something, so you actually did get residuals, as it were, which is quite a good deal. But not when the contract says they can use it for anything.
Yeah, it's difficult when they say they can use it for everything and distort it and stuff, and that's what a lot of the terms and conditions say. That's why we got to read them and we got to say something about that. But yeah, so you've also brought in a possibility for voice artists, though, because it could be, and that's one of the things that we say here, is that you can lend your voice too for good things, right? It could be that you can make money of it for residuals because you have one recording and they do all sorts of things with it and you just keep getting some money in. But it's going to be a pittance, by the way. right? It's not like wonderful residuals that we tend to get from commercials and stuff.
It'll be like
you can
Spotify
also lend
for,
you can
for
also
artists.
you can also lend your voice to people who don't have a voice. And this, of course, is what Rupal Patel is doing.
Right.
She's got a whole thing. She's been at this for a while, getting people's voices and then creating synthetic voices for people who need to be able to speak. Like, for instance, in the olden days, a young girl who didn't have a voice, right, through some illness or was born that way, if she wanted to talk, she had to have the voice that was an electronically recorded older man or something. So it just was weird. It was like, what's that called? That thing when Linda Blair sort of, The Exorcist or something.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So one of the things is that they're now getting voices of all sorts of people and ages to help people who don't have a voice, like Stephen Hawkins, for instance, right? There are ways of lending your voice and for good that really help people too.
Absolutely, that's
and also you can save your voice at different ages. So imagine you turn out to be old and grey, and you think, I can do a young voiceover. I'm just going to whip up my young 26-year-old voice, whoop, and so you get your 26-year-old synthetic voice to do the ad, and there you are. Think of the range that you have.
Yeah, it's all interesting, isn't it? All these possibilities. But like you say, it would be nice to have some kind of licensing structure around it, or the ability to have a voice print that you could search the internet for your voice, and it would, I mean, that would be a great tool. If someone could develop a tool that would listen to all the ads playing on stations and figure out whether you had been paid royalties on that, if they were just using it without permission.
That's true. And that, of course, is doable. And that's one of the things we're talking about, watermarking.
Yeah,
right?
watermarking.
Voice.
Yeah, right. Yep.
It's interesting. We had a Chinese gentleman come and join us as a guest in one of our meetings. And they want to set up a huge, big database of people's voices in China. We said, an interesting idea, but I don't know if you're going to get too many Europeans to want to do that.
That would be interesting.
But bear in mind, that's already being done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, and here's a real freaky one, right? Well, we already know about deep fakes from people's faces and stuff, but obviously deep fake voices are being made. What's happening is that lots of, and this affects us because we train a lot of corporate executives, a lot of big executives had recorded shareholders meetings and whatever, their voices are recorded and their voices are being then synthesized. And then people are emailing the lesser beings in their company with a voice recording from the CEO saying, please send money to such and such.
Wow. Yeah.
In the past, it used to just be emails with the CEO's signature and stuff. But now when you've got the CEO's voice telling you to do it, where do you go, right? So this is people get very creative with how to use people's voices for bad as well as good.
Well, it's a testament to how powerful the human voice is. If the CEO does, phone you at your desk, you're going to do what he says. And unless you know about that technology, as we do now with email scams and stuff, most people won't send money offshore from an email, but it still happens, and I'm sure it will happen with voice, as you say, in the coming decades. It's all. Yeah, it's all very interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that space. And who knows when we'll actually have some answers to these questions.
So that's essentially why we're formed as a group to actually educate. It's an educational organization.
Not lobbying.
So,
and
you know, when you know, and thank you for the opportunity to talk, by the way, because this is helping to start people thinking about the thing and not to be too complacent. And we're going to give people ideas of what to do. We've been drawing up contracts that templates of contracts which look after the interests of both the producer of the synthetic voice and also the voice artist. And so it's a case of pulling your head out of the sand and actually realizing that we need to do something because it is happening. It is happening.
Where can people find these educational resources from Ovon?
Well, you're going to find them from Ovon. We're going to be talking about them and we're going to be producing them. Also, we are developing a site which is going to be an educational site. that we'll be launching very soon, which is just basically going to be an educational site for people called AI Voices. And it's going to be everyone can bring their voice in and talk about things. So we're going to show you where you can get contracts, who the people are, where to go and stuff. So it's going to be a bit of a hub.
Right. What's the timeline for development on that?
Probably about another month.
Okay, cool. It's nearly finished. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for joining me today. It's been a great chat about all things Australia and voice and AI voice. So, yeah, thanks for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me. All the best.